privilege to introduce the senator from New York, Senator Schumer.
Thank you very much, Eric, and thank all of you, those in government and out, who are working on these issues, which are so important to both the national security of our country and to the future economy of our country as well. The two sort of combine. And so I thank you for the Commission for the good work it has done. I want to thank Eric and Bob Schmidt for getting me to speak here. When Congress set up the Commission, I couldn't think of two better folks to lead it. And so I very much appreciate that, because it is one of the issues that is probably the most important facing us. If you looked at the ratio of how much attention this issue gets in terms of what government should be doing, as opposed to its importance, it's one of the lowest ratios that there is. And that is not good for the future of the country. We all know that artificial intelligence is changing everything. How we communicate, how we conduct commerce, how we protect and store and analyze data, how we protect ourselves. It's going to have a huge impact on national security. And if America can get AI right, we'll be the ones to maintain a national security edge on our adversaries. But the converse is also true. We may lose that edge if we don't get it right, or if we're complacent and let others get ahead of us. If we get AI right, we'll be the ones who benefit most from the economic potential, the new jobs that come from AI. But it also, and I would just say, even though this is mainly a national security and that kind of audience, we all have to be thinking about not just new industries, but also the millions of workers, many on the lower end of the economic spectrum, who could have their jobs or ways of life disrupted by AI. We're not going to get the kind of large government support that we need, and I will talk about in a minute, unless average Americans feel they're being paid attention to and taken into account as we move forward. That was a lesson of international trade 30 years ago, and we can't repeat the same mistake now. Now, also importantly, if we can lead the world in developing and implementing this new technology, we will set the norms and boundaries for the use of AI around the world. Just think of what it would mean for Russia or China, most likely, to lead the world in AI. President Putin has said that the nation that leads in AI will be the ruler of the world, and he's made his intentions clear. China runs a massive surveillance state that relentlessly tracks its citizens, controls the flow of information, suppresses minority views, and brutally punishes dissent. So we need not to have their motivation or their way, but we need to match and exceed their level of commitment, which thus far we have not done. A future where America leads the world in AI is one that recognizes privacy rights and individual liberty and democratic values. It's a future where the militaries are smarter, not just more lethal. On the flip side, as I said, a dark cast to the future of AI if an authoritarian country wins out. President Kennedy said in his famous speech dedicating the United States to the space race, quote, "Like all technology, space science has no conscience of its own. Whether it will become a force for good or ill depends on man, and only if the United States occupies a position of preeminence can we decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a terrifying theater of war." That's almost an exact analogy 50 years later to AI. So, as we await your final report, I've been doing some thinking about how Congress can ensure that America leads the way in AI, and I'm going to share some ideas with you. We're going to need as much talent as possible to keep our competitive edge in AI, and that's one reason we need some kind of comprehensive immigration reform. I won't say which, but I was just at one of the cutting-edge groups doing AI. It's a private sector group trying to make money. And there are about 220 scientists there. I said, "How many of you were born in America?" 22. out of 200 and some odd. Our immigration laws restricting people who want to come here is hurting us dramatically in this area, and we have to do something about that. In the immigration reform bill that John McCain and I had written and that passed the Senate overwhelmingly and then was blocked in the House, every foreigner who studied STEM and got an MA or PhD in STEM in an American university got a green card stapled to their diploma. Can you imagine how that would change the country and help us as we seek to take the lead on AI? And along similar lines, we must bolster America's STEM education from grade school through grad school and recruit a top-notch AI-ready workforce. At the moment, data scientists on average have 10 years of experience in the field, and China's have 5. We need to maintain and expand this advantage. But finally, and this is what I want to focus on a little bit, or have you focus on in what I've said today, we need to invest heavily in AI and in other related technologies, whether it's quantum computing, G5 or anything else like that, cybersecurity, robotics, biotechnology. In the old days, companies could afford to do much more of the pure research. We had a Bell Labs not too far from where I lived. I was in New York. They were a monopoly, so they could afford to put billions of dollars into pure research, even if the head of whatever it was, Bell, I can't even remember what it was called back then, couldn't even see a way that would create profit. But we're not in that role anymore. Our companies don't have that kind of ability. And so what we need to do is have the federal government have a dramatically increased investment in AI, in the basic research, in the pure research that companies won't do. We're great here in America, and our companies are great at taking that kind of basic and pure research and turning it into practical things. But we're going to lag behind on the basic research and the pure research. So here is the proposal, and it's not firmed up, that we would like to propose. We're not sure the structure, but I'll start out with the structure. What we're thinking about is maybe having the NSF have a subsidiary, NSTF, National Science Tech Foundation, Foundation, working in concert with DARPA, which would be sort of the analog defense agency, and it would be responsible for funding fundamental research related to AI and some other cutting-edge areas, like I mentioned, quantum computing and G5 and robotics. The NSF would also have a board of directors. This new agency, this combined new group, would have a board of directors to oversee them. But the key here would be over 5 years for the federal government to invest $100 billion into funding this research. And the group would fund it. Some of it would go to universities, just like NSF does now. Some of it could go to companies. Some of it could even go to special government agencies in the Defense Department or not. But the kind of pure research that needs to be done would have a long revenue stream. We'd also fund undergraduate scholarships, graduate fellowships, trainees, and postdoctorate support in the targeted research areas, and the development of test bed type of facilities that would be before you'd get to the pure research. Now, this is just a discussion draft, but it's gotten a lot of support from the people I've shown it to who know this. We will do better dollar for dollar than the Chinese government in investing in AI. But if they outspend us 3, 4, 5 to 1, which they're doing now, we'll fall behind in 5 years or 10 years, and we will rue the day. Rue the day. Now, this idea I should tell you, has some support of some people very close to the president and very close to Mitch McConnell. But thus far, they have been unable to get their full-throated support. And anyone here who has any relationships with those people or people near them should be pushing this. This should be bipartisan. This should not be a partisan issue. This is about the future of America. This should not be a political issue. This should be sort of with probably even greater importance, like putting a man on the moon. But if we don't do these real investments in our universities, in our companies, in our government agencies, so that we become or maintain our cutting-edge lead in AI and in these other fields, it's going to really hurt us dramatically within several years. So Eric has seen this proposal and has helped us modify it. And if you have thoughts or ideas, please send them through the commission to us. But it's one of my goals as minority leader, might be one of my goals as majority leader one day, to get this done, because I love America, and this is so vital for the future of America. Thank you very much, everybody.
Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Kennel, and I am a Director of Research and Analysis at the Commission. It is my distinct pleasure today to introduce the next two speakers of our fireside chat on a topic focused on AI for humanity. So please would you welcome the two speakers who need no introduction, Dr. Henry Kissinger and Dr. Nadia Shadlow.
See if we're okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. So first we'll have to use our imagination a little bit because there is no fireplace here, but we are thinking it's a fireside chat. And I'm so grateful to have this opportunity today. Dr. Kissinger and I met several years ago now, I think, right? Dr. Kissinger, he has been a key person where you can go to for advice about both professional and career things as well as geopolitical events, right? Very few friends can do both. But Dr. Kissinger really needs no introduction. As all of you know, he's one of the world's most renowned geopolitical practitioner as well as thinker. And he did all of that well before AI came into being. He has that rare combination also of a true intellect, and I really admire him for taking on something relatively new like AI after the height of his career. AI is pretty daunting as someone also relatively new to it, coming to it. Dr. Kissinger decided he wanted to do a deep dive to learn more about the technology and about the implications of artificial intelligence for our political systems and for geopolitics writ large. As many of you know, he's written two articles, both published in The Atlantic, 2018 and 2019. I'd encourage you all to read both of them. He also wrote a book in 2014, preceding that, called World Order. And one of the last chapters of that book, sorry, it's sort of going in and out. One of the last chapters of the book talks about the implications of technology. it has a really interesting insight. He talks about the ordering system sort of for the world. So during the age of enlightenment, it was reason. In the medieval period, it was religion. In today's era, it's technology and science that helps us sort out events. And I think that that's a useful way to think about what we're going to talk about. He called them actually the governing concepts of our age. Articles that are relevant to the commission as well, and I'll draw out some of these, use them as questions to start out with, and then open it up to questions from the audience. First, he described AI as inherently unstable. AI systems are constantly in flux as they acquire and analyze new data. Now, to those of you in the audience who are national security professionals, stability is a key concept that we like to actually have in the system. So there's an inherent contradiction between the stability of AI and national security concepts. And that's something I'd like Dr. Kissinger to talk about a little bit. But even preceding that, we're here really ultimately as we talk about this competition and about the tension that the interim report also talks about, because ultimately this is a contest between two political systems, right? And we shouldn't forget that, essentially. It's fundamentally between two political systems and the impact that artificial intelligence will have on those systems. It's about whether or not artificial intelligence will advantage open and democratic countries like ours or authoritarian states. And that's something I'd like to start off with by asking Dr. Kissinger to talk a little bit about his views about that, and then we'll move on to a couple of other questions. Thanks, Dr. Kissinger.
Thank you very much, Nadia. I've had the pleasure of working with Nadia on several projects, and I've seen her on the advisor to the president's job, also when it ended. And we were on the advisory board, defense advisory board together. So it's a great pleasure to be here. So that you can calibrate what I'm saying, let me give you a few words about how I got into this field. I became a great friend of Eric Schmidt, who is today one of my best friends. He invited me to give a speech at Google. And before that, they showed me some of their extraordinary achievements. And I had barely met Eric before that. And I began my speech by saying, I'm tremendously impressed by what I've seen, but I want you all to understand that I consider Google a threat to civilization as I understand it. This was the beginning of our friendship. And the next step in my being here was, I was at an international conference which in Europe, which on its schedule had a provision for artificial intelligence. And I thought this was a great opportunity for me to catch up on my jet lag. And I was heading out of the door when Eric, who was standing there, said, this might interest you, and you really ought to hear it. Except for that, you might have been spared this occasion. So I went there, and somebody from DeepThink was explaining that he was designing a computer that would be able to play the game of Go. And he was confident that he could design it so that it would beat the champions of China and of Korea. And as you know, Google, that Go has 180 pieces for each side, beginning on an open square, and the strategic goal of the game is to constrict the ability of the opponent until they can't move at all. But when you put your first piece down, it's not like chess that you have it lined up. You put your first piece down, you don't know how this is going to develop, and it takes a long time to develop. So the idea that you could design a computer that could match that as a creative game seemed extraordinary to me. And I went up to the speaker afterwards and said, how long will it be that we become Incas to the Spanish computers, that they will achieve an intellectual dominance? And he said he was working on that. And he is. So over the years, Eric was kind enough to introduce me to a lot of artificial intelligence researchers. And I look at it not as a technical person. And I don't challenge or debate the technical side of it. I am concerned with the historical, philosophical, strategic aspect of it. And I've become convinced that artificial intelligence and the surrounding disciplines is going to bring a change in human consciousness exceeding that of the Enlightenment, because of the inherent scope of the investigations it imposes. So that's why I'm here. And I gave a speech at Stanford a few weeks ago at the opening of the Artificial Intelligence Center. And I said, it's sort of absurd that I'm here. You people who sit in the audience, I said to them, have written thousands of articles. I've written 2, and one was a joint authorship with Eric and one other person. And I said, the only significance of my presence and of what I do, I said, you people work on the implications, on the applications. I work on the implications. And I don't challenge the applications. I think they're important, they're crucial, but frankly, I think you don't do enough. You don't go the next step. Those of you who know something about the field, of what does this mean if mankind is surrounded by automatic actions that it sometimes cannot explain. It can unexplain what happens. But as I understand it, not always why it happens. So this is why I'm here. And it's in that context that you ought to assess what I'm saying. But I have put aside some other work for the last 3 years to work on this and to educate myself, because I think in the conceptual field, that is the next big step for mankind.
Hopefully they listened to you, Dr. Kissinger. Did they listen to you at the Stanford audience?
I think the technicians are too modest in the sense that they're doing spectacular things, but they don't ask enough of what it means. I would say the same for strategists. This is bound to change the nature of strategy and of warfare. Because if you, and some of you can judge better than I how much it's taken aboard yet. I don't think on the global field it is yet understood what this will do. It's still handled as a new technical departure. It's not yet understood that it must bring a change in philosophical perception of the world. Much of human effort has been to explain the reality around it. And the Enlightenment brought a way of looking at it on a mathematical basis and on a rational basis. That was a huge departure already that changed history fundamentally. But the idea that you can explore reality in partnership of what is out there, and that you explore it by means of algorithms where you know what they will produce, but you do not yet know why. That is when people start thinking about it, and when, as they will, that will fundamentally affect human perceptions. And this way of thinking up to now, historically, has been largely Western thinking. Other regions have adopted it from the West, I mean the rationalistic thinking. As that spreads around the world, now unpredictable consequences are going to follow.
In the end, are you optimistic in terms of AI and its interaction with democracy, in AI changing human cognition, as you pointed out, in AI having explanatory powers or not humans having explanatory powers, AI not necessarily? There's an interesting point that you make in some of your articles about how AI, by its very nature, is going to change human cognition and reasoning because we will not have had the experiences that AI will get to. AI will get there first before us.
Well, the point I made is AI has consequences that we elicit, but we don't always know why. And so now, am I optimistic? First, I would have to say, honestly, the future of democracy itself, putting AI aside, it's something that should concern us, because for a society to be great, it has to have a vision of the future. That is to say, it has to go from where it is to where it has never been, and have enough confidence in itself to do it. When you look at too many democracies, the political contest is so bitter and the rivalries are so great that to get an objective view of their future, it's getting more and more difficult. Who would have thought that the House of Commons could break down into a collection of pressure groups operating like the House of Representatives, but the House of Representatives is part of a system of checks and balances, while Britain is based on a unitary system that requires consensus for its operation. So what AI does is to inject a new level of reality, of a new level of perceiving reality. Most people don't understand that yet. Most people don't know what it is. But I think that those of you who work on it are pioneers in an inevitable future. And when we think in the Defense Department about the future, this is a huge problem, because increasingly AI will help shape the approaches to problems. For example, I was in office in the period of massive, it started with massive retaliation and then developed into various applications. But the key problem we face in actual crisis, as security advisor, how do you threaten with nuclear weapons without triggering a preemptive strike on the other side? And as the weapons themselves became more esoteric, even in terms of the 70s, when we moved to fixed land-based missiles, they had a high potential for retaliation, but next to no potential for being used diplomatically. It's often, when histories of that period are written, there are debates about the trigger happiness of an administration that went on alert. We went on alert from level 4 to level 3, which isn't a high level of alert, but no newspaper reader knows that. But one reason we went on alert was because we could generate a lot of traffic on, and you could see things that were being done. Planes were being put in the air and troops were put. And what you know of AI, it makes it infinitely more important, but much of what you can do in AI, you don't want to put on the table as a capability to be restricted, because its secrecy is itself part of its strength. But so in the field of strategy, we are moving into an area where you can imagine capabilities of extraordinary and even permitting tremendous discrimination. And one of your problems is that the enemy may not, if you choose, may not know where the threat came from for a while. So you have to rethink what were elements of arms control, and you have to rethink even how the concept of arms control, if at all, applies to that world.
You have a nice line in one of the articles about how AI essentially upends all of the strategic verities that we've sort of had as part of our way of thinking over the past 30 years, including arms control, including deterrence, including, as we talked about in the beginning, stability. But I wanted to ask you one sort of specific question, and then I'll open it up. So are there situations in which, going backwards, you're at the White House again, taking decisions? Are there situations in which today you would trust an AI algorithm to make a decision at that level in the national security space if you're faced with a tough decision? Are there areas where you could see AI algorithms helping national security decision makers?
I think it will become standard that AI algorithms will be part of the decision-making process. But before that happens, or as that happens, the decision makers have to think through the limits of it and what might be wrong with it, and they have to test themselves in war games and even in some actual situations to make sure that what degree of reliability they can give to the algorithms. And also, they have to think through of the consequences. When I talk about these things, I think I studied a lot about the outbreak of World War I, because the disparity between the intention of the leaders and what they produced is so shocking. Not one of the leaders who started the war in 1914 would have undertaken it if they had had any conception of what the world would look like in 1918 or even in 1917. None wanted an act of such scope. They thought they were dealing with a local problem and they were facing each other down, but they didn't know how to turn it off. That once the mobilization process started, it had to go to an end in which a crisis over Serbia ended with a German attack on Belgium, neither of which had anything to do with the original crisis. But the attack on Belgium was an absolutely logical consequence of a system that had been set up and that required a quick victory. And the quick victory could only be achieved in northern France. So never mind that there is a crisis in the Balkans and that Germany and France are not directly involved in the outcome. The only way to get an advantage in time over the possible mobilization of Russia was to defeat France, no matter how the war started. And it was a masterpiece of planning. Then one of the really interesting things is that the Germans had to knock out France within 6 to 8 weeks. And the man who designed this plan allegedly said on his deathbed,